It's June and I'm already starting to kind of gather topics and verses and contexts into which I'm going to start my schedule for my sermons for 2026. This one motivated me to do that, the sermons that I had today, because this morning's was a rather, wasn't a real chipper, everybody, I'm okay, you're okay kind of sermon. And I thought, okay, maybe tonight will be pretty good. No, it's two in a row. Sorry, I apologize. It's going to be tough tonight too. I'm going to try to do better next year to put balance in my sermon Sunday morning and Sunday afternoon, so that when one's really tough and gut punch kind of thing, the next one will be a little more uplifting. Because boy, this one tonight, it's like, how can it go wrong? What happens when it goes wrong? And what's the result of what goes wrong, and how it's going to impact you? So this is going to be a tough one. But Jeremiah, we know him as the weeping prophet. Well, there's a reason for that. He was a preacher to a people that didn't want to hear the truth. And that was a tough thing. It's always a tough thing. And y'all know how that is, because y'all have kinfolk, friends, people you know and love, or you would try to tell them something, and with some folks you just can't warn them. You just can't tell them, this is the right path to go on, because they don't want to hear it. In fact, I have thought with some of my kids, I don't know, but what on occasion, just the warning itself was almost an invite to see if they couldn't get away with it. I know people like that. If you warn them of some danger that's coming up, well, their response is, well, I think I got this. I think I can do that and get away with it. God is trying to warn his people through Jeremiah, and it's not any wonder he was called the weeping prophet, because what he saw, in fact, if you read Jeremiah and then read the Lamentations right after, I highly advise that sometime, because over and over and over again through Jeremiah, he warns them, come on guys, listen up, change your way, do things right. And they didn't. And then he walks through the devastation that once was Jerusalem in lamentation, and saying, oh, look at the mess we got here. Look at the mess we got. And why? Well, we're going to have that explained here shortly. Because in the 10th verse here in chapter 6, he said to him, God's saying, who would I give a warning to about what's going to happen when y'all won't listen? Do you ever get frustrated with your kids like that? I've had that experience where, am I just bumping my gums, as boys would say? Am I just flapping my mouth and had no product to it whatsoever? Because what I'm saying, you're not hearing? I know people like that. It doesn't matter what you say and how you warn them, they're not going to hear it. God's fed up with it. He tells them flat out, you can't hear it. The phraseology here is very Jewish in its nature. Your ears are uncircumcised, okay? Then you can't give heed. In other words, you're just plain old heathen in your mind, is what he's saying. You don't have a mind that's willing to or ready to hear what I have to say. And that's why you can't hear. It has nothing to do with the difficulty of the message, the hardness of the message perhaps, but not the difficulty in understanding. It's a fact you just don't want to hear it. And so therefore he is running against that kind of a people. And it's a people whose attitude is bad. Look at the next part of it. Behold, the word of the Lord is a reproach to them. They have no delight in it. Things that we love, we tend to spend time doing, investing in, following, pursuing, which again, in the Bible study this morning we did, where the point was brought out, rightly so. We don't study our Bible enough. Why is that? Because if we love something, we tend to pursue it. Things that we delight in, we want to fill our time with. Why is it that we're not all Bible scholars for the time we've been members of the Lord's body? Why is it that we don't know the simple answers, let alone some of the complex ones that can be spoken of and discussed and talked about amongst those who are pretty mature and know some very basics? When we get to a point where speaking about, as someone mentioned in the class, Hebrews 6, and it talks about leaving those things that are elementary, going beyond that. There's a lot of folk who are not able to, but part of the reason is they really have no delight in the Lord, or they would be studying their Bible all the time, knowing what God has to say about things. I have some of the greatest conversations about the Bible with my son in South Africa. We WhatsApp or Signal or whatever the app is on my phone that brings him up. Now there is a delay. There's like a 2-3 second pause between our conversations. When I say something, I have to wait a moment before I say, did you hear me? Because he does, it's just a delay. You know, that has been one of the greatest training modus operandi that I have run across lately for my patients. Because, you know, when I start talking about something and I want you to get it, I want you to get it right now. And he does get it, it's just that I have to wait so that the communication gets to him and he gets it and he can respond. Hey, I got that, Dad. Okay? But the point being, of course, we have these great religious discussions back and forth, and we have to go slow at it, measure our words, and be precise and concise when we speak to one another. But it is amazing the discussions you can have with someone who is well versed in the Bible. There are just some givens about some of the topics we discuss. Some of the topics that are much more complex than what most people, religious people particularly, but even members of the Lord's body, would even think about talking about. This kid knows his Bible really well, and it's really nice because I can ask a question where 5 assumptions must be made in order for the question to make sense, and he gets it because he studies all the time. That's the way we all ought to be. We all ought to love God's Word so much. We have such delight in it that we want to know. In fact, the other end of the spectrum is folks who don't delight in it, and so they don't know. And here's some of the things that happens, too, because God just points out, I'm weary of holding it in. I'm fixing to tell you exactly how it's going to go. And one of the things that's going to happen, and he was talking in the context about the devastation Nebuchadnezzar would wreak on Jerusalem and the Jewish nation. He says everything's going to go sideways for you, and it's not going to be pretty. But going on further than that, he says here's part of the reason, because from the least of them to even the greatest of them, everyone is given to covetousness, from the priest to the prophet. Well, that sounds like our country, doesn't it? Where the motivating factor for most of any discussion that is had has to do with the finances involved. And how much does it cost? What's the return? What's our investment? I think, too, when you look at the prophets and priests and how they dealt with that situation, they have also healed the hurt of my people slightly. I like the New King James translation of that. It very much points out the fact that the healing there this is a sarcasm. This is a sarcastic statement. They're healing my people slightly. Here's how they're doing it. They're telling you what you want to hear. Oh, everything's going to be fine. Peace. That's what we're looking at here. It's going to be all right. This old mean prophet out here, all he ever does is preach negative. Oh, Jeremiah's got nothing good to say about this nation, and he's always preaching something negative, right? And of course, on Lamentation, everything he said was true because it was from God. But the real problem in verse 15 is brought out with the attitude and the ignorance that existed within God's people at this time. No, he says, were they ashamed when they had committed abomination? I think the first thing that needs to be noticed in this rhetorical question that he answers is that these people were committing abominations. Now, if you look at the text right there into which this falls, the abominations are ignoring God's word and not being able to discern right and wrong in God's word. Not having an attitude that wants to know what God said. That was the abomination in this context he's talking about. But he says, were they ashamed when they committed abomination? No, they were not at all ashamed, nor did they know how to blush. You know, we live in a culture today where the crudities and the ugliness of common everyday speech has gotten to the point that it is commonplace. And I regret that we live in a time where that delicacy of speech that is essential in civilized cultures doesn't exist in ours. You want to know part of the reason why we're so guttural and so ugly in conduct and activity? It's because when we see advertisements that use profanities and crudities in the advertisement, and they're commonplace, they're everywhere, they become natural. We hear them, we don't like them, but you know, after a while we get numb to those kinds of things to the point we don't even recognize how ugly they really are. And they really are terribly ugly. And yet they're so commonplace in our culture we don't think much of them anymore. We have forgotten in this culture how to blush. And I'm afraid very often it is the case that Christians, concerning God's Word, have forgotten how to blush when somebody brings up a false doctrine that is so devastating and so wrong that there ought to be a response of, really, dude? You're going to press that issue? That's a hill you want to die on? That's a doctrine you want to defend? It ought to be an anomaly to us. It ought to be shocking that somebody would even mention something like that. And yet it's commonplace in the church, and people go off the deep edge in doctrine that doesn't exist in the book. And now I'm going to point out the solution, which is going to go over like a lead balloon for anybody that's young and likes new and pretty, okay? Because that ain't going to get it. Jeremiah said, stand in the way and see and ask for the old path where the good way is. You know, I'm a little bit older now, not much, a little bit older now. And I used to really enjoy the challenge of something novel, something new. Trying to learn things has always been just part of my nature. I like to dig into things. I'm almost as bad as my eldest son, who loved to tear things apart just to see what was there, and not giving a great deal of thought about how they might go back together and work again. And certainly it is the case. You can learn a lot of things, but you know, you really need to put it back together so it works again. I like learning new stuff. I like learning new things. It's a motivation for me, and when it comes to the Bible and learning stuff about what God has to say, because I recognize I don't know it all. But let me tell you for a fact, the real truths are not new. And this is a shock for some people, because we are a people of discovery. We have taken great pride in this country for the things that we have discovered. The new boundaries, new frontiers, new ideas that come through. Technology is a miracle for us. Who would have thought we'd be carrying a TV in our pocket? But we do. It's amazing what we have discovered and what's new. The truth has never changed. And when it comes to doctrinal things, particularly, the truth of God's Word, the truth that Jesus says, I am the truth, the way, the truth, and life, that hasn't changed. It's been really the same since dirt. It was just in progress of being revealed until Jesus came and showed us exactly and precisely everything that is truth. But that truth never does change. And so therefore, when Jeremiah says, you know, let's go to the old ways, let's look at the old paths, he defines the old paths as where the good way is. That's where the good way is, the old paths. Truth has always been, always will be. The sooner we go back to the way it was, the more successful we will be in learning what is true. You know, that's been the plea of churches of Christ in this country, but throughout the world, as it turns out, for eons, since the beginning of the church, since Acts 2. How do we determine who is the church? Well, that's very simple, really. Go back to Acts 2 and see how it started. See who composed the church then. How did they become the church then? What was done in order for them to be saved? But you go back to the original. That's the way of truth. It's the good way. Any kind of adjustment from that point forward is an adulteration of the truth. It's a mutation that doesn't belong and it's unnatural. It's not the real thing. Jeremiah was telling him, you know, you've got the truth. God's been giving you the truth all the time, and all you're looking for is newfangled things. Oh, and we're not worried about it. Oh, there's peace. We're okay. We're good. But we're not. And so therefore, we need to go back to it. But then it comes to not just the knowledge of it, we need to walk in it. We need to apply it to ourselves. Now, this is where the real hard part comes, because it's one thing to know something. It's quite another to do it. I was talking to Billy a while ago. Had some good conversation with him. He's getting his sugars in control. And I was surprised because for him, it sounded like it was easy. And so I said something to that effect, and he laughed. He goes, no, it's not easy. But you do what you do because it's the best thing for you. You have to do something. When you get the knowledge, it doesn't do any good if you don't apply it. Folks, we need to go to the old paths where the good way is, and we need to walk in it. And it's at that point that we'll find rest for our souls. And here's the response people gave. This is the shocker. But they said, we will not walk in it. Didn't have anything to do with the matter of not understanding what was necessary, what the path was that they were supposed to take. The problem is, I just don't want to. That's the place where it gets kind of sketchy, because when you get to the judgment seat, and you have to give an account for what you've done. And God has plainly spoken through His Word and revealed what He wants us to do. And we just decide, nah, I ain't gonna do it. What do you think might be the result of that kind of pursuit, that kind of decision? Somewhere along the line, we'll have to answer for what we've done. I would encourage everyone to look at the old ways and go back to the history. That stuff that's written for our learning, for admonition, and understand that's not there as a general history of the Jewish people way back in the day. That is written so that we can understand this is how God works. Okay? This is how He functions. And while we as humans very often cut corners and compromise and even sometimes leave the basic principles out of pragmatism, that's the wrong answer for it, and God doesn't do that. God's going to stick to His Word, and we are going to be held accountable. And the best way to go about it is to go back the old paths, find a good way, and walk in it. If you're not doing that today, I would highly encourage you to do it in looking at Jeremiah, the weeping prophet, and the book of Lamentation. When you read through Jeremiah, the pleadings that he did, and he had. And then you look at Lamentation. Crossing God is not a wise decision. We need to do that today. We need to do what's right today. We need to go back the old paths and stick with what's true. Truth never changes. So if we stick with what's true, we'll be all right. If you're not doing that today, you need to change your way. We offer an invitation song as an encouragement, and we want you to be encouraged to do what is right. We invite you to respond as we stand and we sing.